Concluding Lord of the Castle by Shirley Jackson. At any rate, the lady's prayer should help you in your task, Nicholas said, coming softly into the room. For if I know your devil at all, nothing will bring him more quickly than the defiance of a beautiful woman. And so I called Joseph and bade him keep Elizabeth prisoner in a high tower of the castle until such a time as she should be more inclined to be courteous to her host. And now suddenly Nicholas and I were feverish and hopeful of our search, for the time had come when the books my father had followed were beginning to be intelligible to me, and I could read easily the secrets they held. And one night I determined to be at this business of the devil and his will. I had caused Elizabeth to be brought to dinner, where she sat sullen and silent, so I ordered her removed, to hide her tears in her tower prison. The incident had left me in an evil humor, and I was ready that night for anything the devil might bring with him. When Nicholas and I had finished dinner, we sat together quietly until I said, "Nicholas, I mean to try the devil tonight." Nicholas laughed as always. "Ha ha ha ha!" "Go carefully," he said. "Our father's ghost will be watching." "Will you try with me?" I asked. Nicholas shook his head. "Sometimes, half-brother," he said, "these things are better done alone. I will be waiting to hear of your success." And so I sat alone in the study that had been my father's, with one of his great books open on the table in front of me, and I drew the awful diagrams the book ordered and mixed my secret potions and spoke the dreadful words that were to call the devil to my side. In nomine Lutheris, Sathanus et Spiritus Arcaranus. These words the book had ordered me to speak, and as my lips formed the unholy syllables, the room rocked, and a great thundering roll came from the walls and the ceiling, and from a cloud before the fire where lay my deadly potion stepped the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Aghast, I let my hand fall from the book, and I stared at this image in wonder and delight. Elizabeth, she was forgotten, and my father and my vengeance and the devil himself, for I had found a way to greater joy than either vengeance or love could bring. I felt myself drawn forward to the figure that stood so silently regarding me, and I took a half-step toward her, then held her hand warningly. "Walk carefully," she said. Then she held up her hand warningly. "Walk carefully," she said. "Come not too close to me." Recklessly I ran to her and seized her hand. "Is there any danger in you that I would not willingly embrace?" I demanded, and came ever closer to her. With this, however, she laughed and leaned her head back to look at me. "You are brave indeed," she said. "No more than that shall I say of my Lady of the Fire. Let it be enough to add that for many nights, while Nicholas laughed at my anxiety, I locked myself again in the great study, and from my father's book repeated the spell that had brought her to me at first. I cannot say how the love of a being such as this will affect a man. I know only that I was mad, and being mad knew my madness and deliberately sought it out. No word of my father passed those days between Nicholas and me. Everything was forgotten before the dreams of the image which came to me in the fire. Ardently as I implored her not to leave me, to stay or to take me with her, she would always reply, half smiling, "You will be with me soon enough, and we shall never be parted then." Such things, I know, lead to desperate deeds in a man, and yet it was Elizabeth, weary of her prison, who led me to my last disaster. For one golden afternoon, as I lay in the garden dreaming of my love, Nicholas came to me and spoke softly and quickly. "I have given orders, half-brother, that Elizabeth be released from the tower." Angrily I half rose. "Who are you to be giving orders in my home?" I demanded first and then. "And Elizabeth, has she repented?" "I gave orders because I, too, am lord here," Nicholas said quietly. "And Elizabeth has repented. I could not speak before the mockery in his eyes. What would I have to do with Elizabeth, who was nothing before my lady in the flames? And Nicholas, he would be driven away, half-brother or no, and I would have no rivals in my home. But Nicholas said, Elizabeth has repented, and yet despairing of your love, she has turned her heart another way, to one not perhaps as wealthy, but of as noble blood, and he made a gallant bow. Then I was on my feet, hating him and seeing how surely he had stolen my life while I had lain idly under the curse of my spells, and I reached for my sword, but it lay in the study by the fire, where I had cast it off and forgotten it, to kneel at the feet of my lady. Then afraid I saw that I had been tricked, that while Nicholas had stolen my life, my fair lady had held me bound in witchcraft, and I turned from Nicholas and went to the study, and for the last time spoke the words that brought my lady to me. And then, when she came, I did not go to her, but stood safely within the compass of my charmed circle, knowing now that to leave it was death, and I watched her standing lovely before the fire, and I said, "Did you then betray me?" She laughed. "Are you afraid to come closer to me and ask that?" I nearly went over to the fire when she spoke, because the enchantment in her voice was enough to turn any man's head, except if he had in him, as I did, the warm memory of betrayal. "I want to come no closer to you than I know now I can stand with safety," I said. "You will be with me soon enough." "And you, and Nicholas," I said, "what have I left now?" She laughed again. "Even as I betrayed your father," she said, and now I knew that I could still be revenged. "He bade you stay in peace," she added, "and leave him in his grave." Cross again, and again. Oh, and then I thought, and crying aloud to her, I made the sign of the cross again and again, and watched her stand untouched before me. "You have no contact with the powers of good now," she said. "Why do you invoke them against me?" And I fell to my knees and covered my head, and she whispered, "You will be with me soon, my love, for I will be here. I will be waiting for you to come." And when I looked up, she had gone. Then indeed I came out from my charmed circle and raged as a madman at the walls of the fire, seeking her to destroy her. All the curses and invocations I could find in my mind I employed against her, and still found myself only raging against stone. And then I remembered my crying. "Then I shall destroy you, if you are here, if I must destroy the whole world around you." And I ran into the darkness of the night outside, and knew only that there was a flaming torch in my hand, but the castle was old, and the trees were dry, and there was more wood than stone that had gone to make up my home. And as I ran down the road, crying aloud, with the flames from the hill close on my heels, I thought I heard a voice crying from the tower, and I thought of Elizabeth and nearly turned back. But then, seeing the castle where it stood, a thing of flame, I fell instead on my knees and thought of Elizabeth and called her name, and tried to return again from the powers of darkness and ask a kinder Lord to forgive me. And it was there that they found me, the villagers, and dragged me away, still crying, out among themselves at my madness. And so I die, as did my father, for the crimes of witchcraft and murder. For Elizabeth lay in the ruins of the castle. For a day only I lay in my jail, watching the scaffold outside, and I wondered long about the madness that will take a man. And then, with day, as I stood, like my father so long ago, like my father, at the foot of the scaffold, and heard the crowd cry out against me, the ranks of them parted, and Nicholas came up to me where I stood. "Ah, half-brother," he cried gaily, "you have made a pretty revenge for your father." But I asked him coldly, "How did you escape the flames of the castle?" "My mother brought me out to safety," Nicholas said. "Your mother?" "Yes," said Nicholas, "she whom you saw in the fire each night. She who betrayed our father, half-brother. And he started away, laughing. But then he turned and came to me, and his deep eyes were serious. Half-brother, he said, I have one further thing to give you. He lifted my hand as he spoke, and held it tight between his own. A wild, desperate hope leaped within me, and I cried, thinking I might yet save myself from death. Nicholas, help me now. What will you give me? Oh, half-brother, Nicholas sighed mockingly. How eager you are. And he lifted my helpless hand and slipped my ring, my father's ring, the signet ring of our house, off my finger. I give you your freedom, brother, of my house, he said, and he gestured to the gallows. Then, laughing still, he turned again and went through the crowd as I cried after him and raged at my bonds to escape and to be on him. But the crowd roared me back, and the jailers forced me up the steps of the scaffold. And from the height I saw one thing. I saw Nicholas on his way home, as he turned and waved at me, and then I saw him ride alone up the long road to the smoldering embers of my house. I buried my head in my hands, and knew cruelly that now indeed the devil held the hill. I can only think of one reason to connect with my viewers as to why I like that story so much, and it reminds me of Doctor Doom from the Fantastic Four. I would like someday to write my own story kind of based on that. I feel like there's so much going on in there. I know that I will read you one day more popular Shirley Jackson stories, but this was just special because I realized it was her 100th birthday yesterday. I hope you enjoyed hearing that you got some spine tingles out of it. It's not her best story, but it's my favorite. So I will return with more Sword in the Stone tomorrow. Have a good night.